No Man's Sky Beyond brought cooking as part of the update. The food you craft in a nutrient processor can be used to gain various rewards as well as tame wild creatures. In this video we'll go through everything cooking, from how to get set up to all 573 recipes and their uses. Getting set up for cooking is fairly simple. The only device you'll ever need is a nutrient processor. You can obtain the blueprint to build it from the research room in the upper back of the Nexus, on the unmanned terminal between the Starship and the exosuit researchers. The blueprint will cost you 10 salvage technology, which you can find buried on planets by searching with your analysis visor for this symbol, and heading over to it to unearth with your terrain manipulator. They drop at a rate of 2 to 4 per item, so it won't take long to get to 10. The nutrient processor is pretty cheap to craft at 2 metal plating, which is 100 ferrite dust, 1 hermetic seal, which if I remember correctly is about 30 condensed carbon, and 25 sodium. The nutrient processor is also portable and so doesn't require powering, which is fantastic, as you will likely want to build a fair few of these when making batches of certain foods or baits due to multiple levels of refining the ingredients. When it comes to ingredients, there are 48 base ingredients that can be used in cooking. These are all ingredients that aren't made via the process, so will require obtaining elsewhere. So if you fancy yourself a bit of a Heston Blumenthal and want to work on your molecular gastronomical dreams, you'll want to stock up on these. To keep things nice and simple, I've sorted these base ingredients into 6 types. These are wild harvested flora, farmable flora, resources, monstrous products, meat products, and animal byproducts. The wild harvested flora are all plants that cannot be farmed but are found in the wild. These include the 10 new harvestable plants added, which are on screen now. I haven't yet found a planet with more than 3 of the plants on it. Heptaploid wheat appears to be on almost every planet. I found impulse beans only on Lush so far, though my data is too small and skewed to be remotely confirmation. Pulpy roots I found on Lush and fungal, Grarberry on radioactive, and so on. The other 2 in this section are marrow bulb and kelp sac, which can be found in caves and oceans respectively. The next section, farmable plants, includes every farmable plant other than nip-nip, almond pearls, gravitino balls, and sac venom. The resources section is just a few with carbon, condensed carbon, chromatic metal, salt, and carbon nanotubes. Now granted, the nanotubes aren't a base ingredient, you craft them from carbon, but you don't craft them in a nutrient processor. Then the monstrous products, which are just hypnotic eye gathered from abyssal horrors, the specific abyssal horrors being the ones found only underwater and usually at underwater buildings. It's like well, we won't go into what it looks like, they're disgusting, have a huge eye which emits a tractor beam. And larval cores, which can be gathered by destroying the eggs found outside of abandoned buildings. These eggs, when destroyed, will drop larval cores, though picked up quickly as they despawn in a few seconds. Also be sure to look out for the xenomorph type creatures that spawn in waves upon destruction of their precious eggs. Then meat products. These are all items gained via disposing of planetary fauna. The common ones are things like scaly meat which drop from reptile types, meaty chunks that drop from large, often docile creatures, feline liver that drop from cat-like creatures, and so on. The weird ones in this list are things like fiendish roe and salty fingers. Lastly, there are the farmable animal byproducts. You can either gather these in the wild from the creatures using bait, or use that bait to bring them back to your factory base and set up an automated farming system that feeds them while also collecting their bounty. These include such things as eggs, milk, and an assortment of odd things like leopard fruit, nope it's not a fruit, crab apple, Regis grease, and sticky honey. Sticky honey would be fine if it wasn't for the quotations around the word honey. As I said before, there are 573 recipes. All of these recipes were compiled from the game files by yours truly over the course of about 12 hours last night, and is a complete list. I have split them up in various ways, though I think it will be most helpful when I've had a chance to do a bit of coding, but for the moment there are 5 tiers of recipes. I define a tier in cooking the same as I do in crafting. A tier 1 recipe requires only base resources and products to create. A tier 2 recipe requires at least one tier 1 item to create, and say a tier 5 requires at least one tier 4. The way that the recipes are quite different to standard crafting is that there are many ways to cook the same thing. So while there are indeed 573 total recipes, there are only 220 unique items created by cooking, which is still a huge amount. As always, a huge list of all recipes can be found on my website for easy referencing and such, but the real deal will come later. Using the early on recipes, you can increase your production efficiency by quite a bit by using farmable items. This is where the multiple recipes for the same product come in useful, for both food and baits. For example, refined flour can be made in 3 different ways and is used in a huge amount of recipes. You could gather hep-deployed wheat in the wild and process that, or you could process kelp sack into kelp rice, then kelp rice into refined flour. Or you could do the most efficient way, which is to process frost crystal into glass grains, which then processes into refined flour, giving you an unlimited supply without leaving your base. Processed sugar is another one. Grawberry and sweetroot both process into processed sugar, but so does cactus nectar, which is made from cactus flesh, another you can farm in your base. Anything involving meat must of course be gathered in the wild, though animal byproducts like eggs, milk and such can be farmed industrially and automatically with the new buildable items, and eggs and dairy are used in huge amounts within the recipes, for butter, ice cream, cakes, cheese and more. Before we move on to the next section, here is the tier 5 recipe you can make without leaving your base, provided you have the right setup. Jam donut. Yes, a jam donut is a top tier delicacy, people. First you are going to need faecium and some frost crystal, so go get those from your farm, process the faecium into wild yeast and the frost crystal into glass grains, and then again into refined flour. Mix those two together to form dough. Next get some fresh milk from your farm and process into cream, then the cream into churned butter, then 2 churned butter into clarified oil. Next harvest your Aquino cactus in your farm to get its cactus flesh and process it into cactus nectar, and then again into processed sugar. Mix the processed sugar, dough and clarified oil into lump and donut. Now we're going to make cactus jelly. To do this you need a bit more cactus flesh, process 2 into cactus nectar and then just 1 of those into processed sugar. Combine the cactus nectar and processed sugar to make cactus jelly. The last step in this recipe of the ages is to combine the cactus jelly and the lump and donut to make a jam donut. There are many more in that list, be creative with it and check it out. There's a whole lot of epic and unique sounding tier 5 recipes. Now for the baits, there are a total of 38 different bait recipes. In order to make all but one of them, you will need a nutrient processor. The one recipe that doesn't require it is the creature pellets, as these can be crafted in your inventory, but it is far cheaper to refine it in the nutrient processor. Also, the pellets are only good for getting them to go dookie. While there are 38 recipes, there aren't all that many baits, as they can be made with multiple different ingredients. Bloody organ used to attract predators can be made by cooking offal sack and mordite, or feline liver and mordite. Here's a table of the 7 different ways to make enzyme fluid, and now a table with 8 different ways to make fermented fruit. Here's a 5 for ground meat, 2 for pheromone sac, 8 for scented herbs, and 3 for sweetened compost, and 2 for synthetic worms. All of the herbivore baits can be made in one way or another using farmable plants, which is rather handy for the long term. For enzyme fluid you can mix either fungal mold, non-toxic mushrooms, which is actually just refined fungal mold, solartillo, which is refined solar vine, or cactus nectar, which is refined cactus flesh, with faecium. Faecium is the new name for copyright and it comes from the same places, either the farmable plant or from dung left by fauna. You can use the cheap pellets to gain copious amounts of the dung from herds of creatures. For fermented fruit, mix Fecium with either starbulb or cactus flesh. For scented herbs, mix Fecium with any of gamma root, selenium, frost crystal, glass grains, which is refined frost crystal, or Siva beans, which is refined gamma root. And lastly, for the big herbivore bait, sweetened compost, which works a real treat, mix Fecium with either of the three ones we just went over: enzyme fluid, fermented fruit, or scented herbs. The actual use of food is a tricky one. You would expect it is to get some cool buffs when you are out exploring, but the game files for every food item simply says that it gives some energy. My in-game testing has shown this is just a bit of a refill of your life support. While that makes sense, it is a bit boring, so I'm hoping that will be expanded on a later date. Monetary gain is also not something you would do the cooking for. The highest value of any recipe, even tier 5s, is like 800 units. It's fairly terrible and often worth less than the ingredients you use to make it. The big thing here is with the master chef and taster extraordinaire, Iteration Kronos. He's an evil fellow who is made up of 2 parts pesky, a dash of passive aggression, and a sprinkle of class. If you bring him any kind of ingredient or processed food item, you can give it to him to taste, and he will unearth his often harsh verdict upon you. But he'll also give you nanites, which is pretty cool. There are 5 different amounts of nanites he will give: 0, 5, 10, 20 or 40 upon tasting a dish. The jam donut we made earlier will likely give you either 20 or 40 nanites. A base ingredient that has undergone no processing will more often than not give you 0 nanites, but sometimes 5. Part processed food item like Solatero, which is selenium processed once, will often give you 5 or 10. So when it comes to this, my mind instantly goes to finding the one recipe to rule them all. A recipe with the highest chance you can get at 40 nanites that takes the least amount of time and effort to make, which can be consistently produced in bulk. This kind of takes tier 5 out of the question, as I'm certain there are tier 4 recipes, maybe even tier 3, with a high quality rating, so let's jump into the files again. After looking more closely at the product values in the files, I found one called cooking value. After adding this to my sheet, it's easy to see how this works. It is a modifier of 0 to 1 via a decimal place, so essentially like a percentage. Most base ingredients have a cooking value of 0, and interestingly there are a lot of tier 1 with a max value, except they all require hypnotic eye, as it's the abyssal stew, largely, which puts that out of the question. There are a whole lot of 5s and a bunch of 4s, some 3s and 2 tier 2 recipes that don't involve hypnotic eye. Both of these tier 2 recipes can be fully completed at your base with the right setup, so let's see which is better. These 2 recipes are Stellar Custard and Salty Custard. The issue here is that while it is tier 2, which means it can be made in 2 sets of processing, in order to make it at your base alone may require more than when using wild ingredients, so we need to judge them by the amount of total processing. Stellar Custard is made with silicon egg, cream and processed sugar. Silicon egg is made with chromatic metal. Cream is made with fresh milk, but processed sugar requires an extra step via cactus flesh to cactus nectar, then the nectar to the sugar, making this a tier 3 recipe if doing purely in a base. If you are wondering where I'm getting unlimited chromatic metal at my base, you can refine it using indium and chromatic metal to make 4 indium, which itself refines the chromatic metal, but that also adds more steps. So Stellar Custard isn't looking great. Then there is Salty Custard, made from salt, cream and processed sugar. Salt can be mined and is a base ingredient. Cream from the fresh milk and sugar from cactus flesh to nectar to sugar. Salty Custard is by far the superior. It even balances out the extra step for the sugar by having salt as a base ingredient. The system's not bad, but they really should do something about the effect of you eating them. Why doesn't processed sugar give me a sugar rush to increase my speed slightly? Or hearty fat heavy stews give me a cold resistance? Or high protein food give me increased melee attack? And wonderfully cooked veggies give me an increase to my health temporarily? I'm not a game dev, so I have no idea what this would take to implement, but it would make cooking so much better and more rewarding. Thank you for watching folks, more guides coming daily. This was indeed a rather large one, so if you made it this far and you aren't yet subscribed, consider doing so, and while I've got you here, check you have the bell rang to ensure you don't miss notifications for other guides. Zanesworld.com has recently had a makeover and is looking absolutely beautiful thanks to Golden Gek, and is being updated daily with new information as it's being found out. That and the Discord link can be found in the pinned comment with all the recipe information that comes with this video, so give it a bookmark for future perusal. Thanks for watching folks, and have an awesome day.